to the stage to take your places so we could start and proceed our today's session. A small request for our team. We need chairs for the jury. They've been taken away. So once again, please, members of the jury, take your seats at the stage so we could proceed. This session is called Resistance and Solidarity. That's something that we will be discussing in the next 60 minutes. And the first topic to talk about is Gaza's resistance within its historical and political context. The first speaker is Mr. Ramzi Barout.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the kind invitation, but also thank you for all the incredible work each one of you has done for Gaza in the last 2 years. Gaza has proved to be the litmus test of humanity, of morality, of civil society, of international law. If it were not for you as a representation of civil society globally, if it were not for you, Gazans would have been the only line of defense against Zionism, against colonialism, and against genocide. You made it possible by creating another line of defense for the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people are not only grateful, but they are also hoping that this movement that was created against the genocide in Gaza will not be a temporary movement that will be dismantled with the assumption that the genocide is over. The genocide is not over. It manifests itself in so many different ways, and the very reasons and the historical context that created or led to the genocide in the first place is still there and will be there until Palestine and the Palestinian people are free. So please don't stop speaking out, don't stop rallying, don't stop centering Palestinian voices, and don't stop creating the momentum that is forcing Zionism as the racist ideology that created Israel from imploding. You are making this happen, and again, Gaza is at the front line of this struggle. not just for the sake of Gaza and Palestine, but for the sake of humanity at large. I was born and raised in a refugee camp in Gaza called Nusayrat. You must have heard so much about Nusayrat in the last 2 years. Unfortunately, much of what you must have heard is affiliated with massacres in Nusayrat. Many of my family members were killed in Gaza, over 110 people as of last year. I stopped counting because there was no point of counting, and because all of Gaza is my family, and I think this is something that is shared by Gazans as well and Palestinians as a whole. We are all one family, and the loss of every family is my personal loss as well. I grew up in a family that was made of a father who was a former freedom fighter, although I believe that my father was a freedom fighter as much as my mother was a freedom fighter, despite the fact that freedom fighting did not necessarily always take place carrying Kalashnikov. They fought for survival, they fought for existence, they fought for their identity, they fought for self-assertion, they fought for their culture, they fought for their religion, they fought for their history, they fought for the prosperity of their family and for their children, and that, by definition, makes every Palestinian in Gaza a freedom fighter, and every Palestinian who is standing up to colonialism and military occupation. One time, I believe it was just before the first Intifada of 1987, I think I was about 10, 11 years old. I saw an Israeli jeep speeding through the refugee camp. And they were going at an exceptionally high speed. And then after that, I saw two Palestinians. They were masked, and they were running at very high speed as well, hiding in the graveyard. We call it the Martyrs' Graveyard in the center of Gaza. Those from Gaza know what I'm talking about. And I asked my dad who these people are. He said they are members of the Islamic Jihad. That was a time before Hamas itself was created. There was no such Hamas to be used as the example of so-called Palestinian militancy, terrorism, and supposedly bad political decisions. Gaza during that time, or armed resistance in Gaza during that time, was controlled largely by two major groups: the socialists, the PFLP in particular, and the Islamic Jihad. Prior to that, we had the Palestine Liberation Army that was part of the PLO, and Palestinians were fighting back then. If you look at the history of Gaza, you are going to find a history of resistance, cultural resistance, popular resistance, but also armed resistance. One thing, and I'm here speaking as an intellectual, if we are to have an honest conversation about Palestine, we are to get in serious trouble, especially in the West. The sensibilities of Western society cannot cope with the idea that Palestinians have utilized and used armed resistance since the Nakba, the catastrophic destruction of historic Palestine. It's not something that we are ashamed of. It's not something that we should hide or need to hide. But we live in a very toxic academic and media and political environment that the mere recognition of the fact that Palestinians have used arms to resist has been such a liability that people are just scared to say it. So if I am standing to debate the issue at Harvard or MIT or Oxford or anywhere, I have to find a way to zigzag around the idea of armed resistance. I replace the word resistance with resilience so I'm not misunderstood. I emphasize popular resistance, but I don't talk about armed resistance. Some of you already speak Arabic, but I'm going to teach you a few words here just as a refresher course. One is the word muqawama. Muqawama means resistance. But muqawama for us Palestinians has a different cultural connotations than the word muqawama in Western platforms, Western academia, Western mainstream society. For them, the word resistance could be a bad thing, as in terrorism, or could be a subject that is open for interpretation. As Palestinian culture, history, and struggle is like going to the market, buying cucumbers and not buying tomatoes, I like Palestinian non-violent resistance. I don't like the violent resistance. I like peaceful resistance, but I don't like this other form of resistance. Well, let me tell you some maybe bad news for some of you. In our culture, there is no distinction between the forms of resistance. For us, it's only called muqawama, and we express that in so many different manifestations. We're not shying away from it, and we are not hiding it. And the reason is that if we do, we are denying not only a fundamental right of our people as a liberation movement fighting for its own survival, but also freedom and justice, but we are also being dishonest about Palestinian history. You see, the problem for Israel is not the armed resistance of the Palestinians. The Israelis have understood something that many of us, especially in the West and so-called progressives in the West, still don't understand. Israel understands. Israel knows that resistance in Palestinian society is not just about arms. When they come and say, Palestinians should give up their weapons or hand over their weapons. What weapons? How many tanks do we have? How many fighter jets? How do you even count? What are the weapons that are being given and what are the weapons that are still in the tunnels? Most of the weapons that are being manufactured in Gaza right now are being repurposed from the unexploded armaments thrown by the Israelis at the Palestinian population in Gaza. If you want us to give away our weapons, if you want the Palestinians to give away their weapons, stop lobbing your bombs and your missiles or the Palestinian population in the first place, because there would be no weapons to be repurposed. So the issue here is not about the legitimacy or lack thereof of Palestinian weapons and Palestinian resistance. It's a diversion from the main issue. What pushes Palestinians to resist in the first place? Take away from us the reason that makes us resist, and we will not resist. And when we resist, do please try to understand that we do not cater our resistance to your sensibility. We resist because nobody came to our rescue. As a child, I was told, my father was a communist, but who was also an Arab nationalist. And he told us, like many men in his generation, that the Arabs will be coming to liberate Palestine. The Arabs are coming. So as children, we thought it's just a matter of time before the Arabs show up. And nobody showed up. I actually do remember one time taxi drivers in Gaza, because you have to feel bad for these guys. They are going around in a circle in this tiny little place. So they start spreading rumors just because they are bored, I guess. And one time the rumor was that the Algerians are coming, and they are coming via the sea. As children, we all rushed. It was during the first Palestinian Intifada. Again, we were being shot and killed for simple protesting the Israeli occupation. We were desperate for an outside help. We went to the beach and we waited. And we waited until sunset. We saw absolutely nothing in the horizon but the Israeli Navy ships. No Algerians came, no Egyptians came, no Jordanians, no Iraqis, no anything. So this generations of Gazans is different than our generation. My generation, that of the first Intifada, we learned the alphabets of self-assertion. We went to the streets and we threw rocks at the Israeli army. I wasn't very good at it, but the idea is that we needed to assert ourselves that we have agency. We are a people who are capable of speaking for ourselves. We cannot marginalize, and even though we have been betrayed by our Arab brethren, we are capable of rising and taking a moral stance. And we did. But this generation is even tougher than our generations. They took that realization to a whole new level. Nobody is coming for your liberation. As Che Guevara has said it, before there are no liberators, the people liberate themselves. So the Palestinian people have been in an active process of self-liberation. Do not blame the Palestinians for taking that moral stance after 77 years of complete marginalization and betrayal and international conspiracy by the US, Israel, Zionism, and the whole Western bloc to, in the words of Jared Kushner, for the Palestinians, they can only have one option and one option only: to put up or what is the right term? To put up or to shut up. Well, we neither put up nor do we shut up. And that's why what happened in Gaza happened. It was the outcome of our own failure. So don't blame the resistance for our own failure. And don't put the Palestinians once again in the corner to self-justify and to explain and to apologize for not behaving the good victims that we needed to behave. And those who are expecting Gaza to be good victims, you know nothing about Gaza. You know absolutely nothing about Gaza. 1948, the Palestinian Nakba. You have hundreds of thousands of people being pushed out of historic Palestine. 250,000 or so of them came to Gaza. Within days, they formed groups called the Fidaiyin. That's before ideology. That's before politics. That's before Hamas, Fatah, and clashes and disunity. The Fidaiyin were peasants. They were fallahin. My uncle was a member of the Fidaiyin. And all they did is that they tried to go back to their villages in southern Palestine to reclaim the crops that they harvested but they did not collect, or the money or the gold left of their wives in their homes after they were expelled from these homes. That was the Fidaiyin movement that evolved over the years, but there has been no time in history in which Gaza did not resist, in which Gaza put up or shut up. It never happened, and it will not happen. And the reason that I have always been saying that Gaza is the center of Palestinian history, is the core of Palestinian history. Gaza is very small, 360 square kilometers, about 180 square miles. And yeah, we talk about the natural gas at the Mediterranean Sea, but it's not like Gaza had these natural resources that Israel, if Israel wants to exploit the gas, they would have done so with or without Palestinian permission. What makes Gaza special is not its territory or its gas or its natural resources, it's the people of Gaza. It's the people of Gaza. And this is why Israel has invested, not in destroying the resistance, because they know that there is no way they could have done that. They invested in ethnically cleansing the Palestinian people out of Gaza, because you remove the Palestinians of Gaza, you remove the heart of resistance from Palestinian society. The fact that we are still there, the fact that the people are still there, even though they are sitting on the ruins of Gaza, the ruins of everything, the mosque and the church and the school and the university and the home and the kindergarten and the art gallery and everything in Gaza, the fact that they continue to do so, it means that the Palestinian people, the heart of Palestinian resistance is still beating. And the fact that it's still beating means that resistance in Palestine would remain alive. Yeah, feel bad for the Palestinian victims, feel bad for the innocent children who were pulverized along with their families. Thousands of them are still under the rubble. Feel bad, because we are human and you should feel bad. But don't think for a minute that resistance in Palestine will stop under any circumstance. Thank you.
Self-defense, resistance, and inverse reality. This is the topic for Mr. Wadia Said.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you to the members of the jury for listening to my statement. My name is Wadia Said, and I teach law at the University of Colorado in the United States. In this brief statement, I intend to address the issue of self-defense in the context of the Gaza genocide, as well as articulate the legal basis for a Palestinian right to resist Israeli occupation. To do this, we have to understand the overall context, not merely as it relates to the question of Palestine, but to the legal status of the Gaza Strip and the nature of the Israeli presence there. In doing so, we must confront how reality has been reversed and distorted in many instances. Also, this exercise is of great importance, especially when we consider the fact that Palestinian nonviolent resistance, such as the kind we saw in the First Intifada between 1987 and 1993, or the Great March of Return in 2018, has been historically met with tremendous violence and repression by the Israeli authorities. As a threshold matter, the International Court of Justice made clear in its July 2024 advisory opinion what was already well understood by many international law scholars, namely that the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem have been illegally occupied by the Israeli military since 1967. This is consistent with how the ICJ ruled in its 2004 advisory opinion, which found that the wall Israeli authorities built in the West Bank to be illegal under international law. Essentially, the occupation constitutes a violation of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination and must end, as ordered by the ICJ. In fact, the ICJ set the end of September 2025 as the date by which Israel must end its occupation of the 1967 Palestinian territories, although that clearly has not occurred. The ICJ's 2024 opinion removed any doubt as to the occupied status of the Gaza Strip, rendering definitively invalid the Israeli position that the redeployment of its forces outside the territory in 2005 meant that the Strip itself was no longer occupied. This background is useful to note because, as many scholars and states have noted, an occupying power does not have a right to self-defense in territory it occupies. Among other claims, some have tried to argue that Israel retains a right of self-defense. In the United States, if you were ever to visit, you would probably see politicians repeating that phrase the same way that they breathe air or drink water, that Israel has a right to self-defense, but it doesn't in territory it militarily occupies. The argument has morphed to the point where Israel retains a right of self-defense because it was subjected to an armed attack by a non-state group from the territory of a different state, Palestine. But arguments along those lines have been basically rendered invalid by the ICJ's ruling. Even those parties who recognized a purported Israeli right to self-defense initially have had to acknowledge that the Israeli authorities have an obligation to respect the principles of international humanitarian law, that is to say, necessity, proportionality, and distinguishing between civilians and military targets. Whatever the case may be, there is never any justification for genocide, not based on arguments about the nature of the events of October 7th or via the claim of self-defense. Even though the United Nations Independent International Commission on the Occupied Palestinian Territory recently found that Israel's actions in Gaza constitute a genocide, to most observers that fact was clear, as its military campaign quickly morphed into a mass reprisal intended to destroy the civilian infrastructure of Gaza and force its population out of the besieged enclave. The result is that the entirety of this military offensive is completely illegal. Further, all arguments about Hamas using civilian infrastructure and homes and individuals as human shields, which even prior to October 7, 2023, were highly contentious and speculative at best, these have been exposed as not based in fact, given the staggering civilian death toll and the Israeli military's feeble efforts to justify their targeting in this regard. I'm sure we all remember Israeli military spokesperson Daniel Hagari showing a calendar as evidence of how Hamas was based under a Shifa hospital. And that's the level of evidence we've been getting. Despite Israeli attempts to negate any Palestinian right to armed resistance, such as declaring the Gaza Strip a hostile territory in 2006 and insisting that its military actions against Palestinians constitute a, quote, armed conflict short of war, what that means is the Israelis are saying, we can shoot at them, they can't shoot back at us. The Palestinians clearly possess such a right. The Fourth Geneva Conventions recognize the right of people under military occupation to resist that occupation, a fact that's been repeatedly reaffirmed by several United Nations General Assembly resolutions over the years, allowing this principle to achieve the status of customary international law in the opinion of numerous jurists. Although not accepted by the United States and Israel, the first protocol additional to the Geneva Conventions of 1977 more specifically support the right of a non-state national liberation movement of a people militarily occupied to use armed force to achieve liberation. The repeated findings of the ICJ that the military occupation of the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem violates Palestinian self-determination is critical in underpinning this right. The main objection to a Palestinian right to resist resided in the idea that a people cannot unilaterally declare that their right to self-determination is being denied by military occupation as a basis to use force against that occupation. The ICJ's rulings recognize both a Palestinian right to self-determination and its violation by the Israeli authorities, thereby rendering this point moot. Palestinians may use force to resist their occupation. To deal with the questions related to October 7th directly, it is correct to note that international law does not condone the taking of hostages or intentionally targeting civilians. In the United States, Israel, and allied nations in the global north, however, officials invoke October 7th as the origin of all violence in this current stage of the Palestinian cause, thereby obfuscating the entirety of the Palestinian the entirety of the Palestinian experience prior to that date. In fact, for over the past 18 years, the Gaza Strip has been a blockaded territory, subject to total Israeli control over its airspace, borders, access to the sea, trade to and from the Strip, as well as periodic military campaigns of increasing severity. Surely, there must be a difference between an occupied people targeting the military apparatus of its occupier and other prohibited acts. There's also the widely recognized fact that the Israeli military caused a significant number of deaths on October 7th via its activation of a policy called the Hannibal Protocol, which calls for killing Israeli personnel before allowing them to be taken captive. A true accounting for October 7th would include establishing the Israeli role and its corresponding legal accountability for producing such a high death toll on that day, and also grappling with when international law allows an occupied people to resist using armed force, as attacks on military personnel and installations enforcing a siege are surely different than killing civilians. In addition to the Israeli rejection of any Palestinian right to resist, the United States recognizes the same position. The United States has classified Hamas as a so-called foreign terrorist organization. That's a legal classification. And that determination rests on the logic that, quote, foreign organizations that engage in terrorist activity are so tainted by their criminal conduct that any contribution to such an organization facilitates that conduct, end quote. This position necessarily demands that every act of violence, and also nonviolence, by the way, carried out by Hamas and affiliated Palestinian groups is illegal, even if it involves shooting at Israeli tanks and soldiers invading the Gaza Strip in service of a genocidal campaign on illegally occupied land. In recent times, the US government has taken this position to extremes. As in March of this year, the State Department's official spokesperson stated, quote, every single thing that is happening in Gaza is happening because of Hamas. This is a position that justifies illegal collective punishment and views all Palestinian life as legitimate collateral damage in an endless war against the people's fight for self-determination and liberation. If this were a criminal law, I teach criminal law in my day job, and if this were a criminal law theory of self-defense, it would be laughed out of the room. Regardless, it appears that the US government believes that Hamas and the Palestinian people in Gaza as a whole are accomplices in crimes against Israelis, and when the Israeli military targets Palestinian civilians, it is Hamas that is responsible for their death. Stated another way, it seems that the government believes that what occurred on one day can justify over 2 years of genocide and deliberate targeting of all aspects of civilian life in Gaza. The argument continues that because it was foreseeable that Israel would engage in hyper-violent mass reprisals to carry out a second Nakba, any Palestinian group confronting the Israeli military bears responsibility for whatever that military does. This is reality stood on its head and inverted to the point that a genocidal army can be absolved of its innumerable crimes through a rhetorical sleight of hand based on what was supposedly foreseeable. On a final point, while there is no legal basis for taking hostages in international law, there is the shattering hypocrisy of referring to Israeli detainees as hostages and Palestinian detainees as prisoners. The parameters of this discussion are deliberately limited to a recognition of Israeli rights and assumption of Palestinian wrongdoing. How can this be when since 1967 over 1 million Palestinians have been jailed by the Israeli authorities under military law in service of an illegal occupation with none of the usual rights afforded a defendant in a civilian criminal court? This is before we even examine the actual conditions of detention and the use of torture by Israeli authorities, and we've heard from many distinguished speakers about that during this very tribunal. This historical record also includes Israel's widespread practice of administrative detention, where Palestinians are held without trial or charge on an indefinite basis. Currently, some 3,500 detainees suffer from this status. And while condemnation for Palestinian groups holding Israelis is widespread in the global north, such condemnation neglects to appreciate that the Israeli Supreme Court has continually, in its own right, upheld the practice of the military using detainees, both dead and alive, as so-called bargaining chips to be used in further prisoner exchange negotiations. In other words, essentially legalized hostage taking. That is why we witnessed the recent release of over 1,700 Palestinians from Gaza who were held by the Israeli authorities without charge and in horrific conditions for the purpose of tormenting them and releasing them once Israel's conditions for a prisoner exchange had been met. The term hostages certainly sounds apt. These short statements underscore the legality and broad legitimacy that envelops the Palestinian cause, which ensure that the struggle will continue until the occupation ends and Palestine is free. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we should talk about Global Summit Flotilla, something that the whole world has been following too, alongside ongoing genocide. Yasmin Akar will be speaking about this.
Dear jury, dear guests and organizers, my name is Yasmin Akar, steering committee member and organizer of the Global Summit Flotilla as well as the Freedom Flotilla Coalition. I speak to you as an organizer, a witness, and a human rights activist. I have sailed with unarmed vessels carrying food, medicine, and human witnesses to Gaza to challenge a siege that has existed since 2007 and was further intensified during the ongoing genocide. We act because the world's institutions, laws, and governments have failed to protect Palestinian lives, and because silence is complicity. Today, I will speak in 3 registers about the realities on the ground and at sea, the violations of international law, and the responsibilities we all share to resist injustice and demand accountability. First, the factual frame. For 18 years, Gaza has endured a brutal, illegal, and inhumane siege. The blockade violates international law, including general international law, international humanitarian law, and human rights law. It restricts everything: airspace, waters, borders, movement of people, and the flow of essential goods. Every aspect of life, daily life, has been controlled by the occupying power, even determining the number of calories allowed per person. A bureaucratic calculation that reduced human beings to statistics. After the genocide began, the siege became a siege upon a siege, a system of deliberate deprivation designed to punish, weaken, and control the Palestinian population. Families remain trapped without sufficient food, medicine, fuel, or water. Hospitals operate without electricity and supplies. Children are malnourished, weakened, and dying. This is not suffering. It is a systematic assault on life itself by the infliction of life conditions calculated to bring about the physical destruction of a whole people. The endurance of this colonial system has never been the work of one state alone. It has been sustained by a network of international actors whose complicity extends from the conference room to the factory floor. Through arms transfers that supply machinery of war, diplomatic cover that shields impunity, and economic partnerships that convert devastation into profit. The siege, thus, becomes not only a policy but a structure of governance, weaponizing the very conditions of existence. Food, medicine, fuel, and water are transformed into tools of violence, distributed or withheld to discipline an entire population into submission. Generations have been born under blockade, their lives defined by scarcity and surveillance. Malnutrition, illness, and psychological trauma are not collateral outcomes, but the predictable consequences of a system built to degrade, dehumanize, and exhaust. International support, political, economic, and military, has woven this oppression into fabric of global order, while corporations extract profit from its maintenance. In this sense, the siege is not an aberration of international politics, but one of its most revealing expressions, a regime of control sustained by those who claim to defend human rights, yet continually enable their destruction. The so-called US-backed aid was part of the very same system. Aid distribution centers became death traps. Dozens of starving people were murdered in cold blood at these sites. This was not humanitarian failure or bureaucratic mismanagement. It was deliberate violence embedded in policy, a calculated cruelty that uses promise of survival as bait. Such acts reveal the nature of the system itself, not one of control alone, but of annihilation. When food becomes a weapon and relief a means of extermination, the intent is no longer merely to crush, but to erase. The siege and its so-called aid apparatus function together as instruments of genocide, mechanisms through which life is reduced to something that can be granted or withdrawn at will. International law and global institutions have repeatedly failed Gaza. Investigations were delayed or buried. Enforcement mechanisms ignored. The media manufactured consent, portraying Gaza as a security threat rather than a besieged and starved people. It must be said clearly, the use of starvation as a weapon of war and the imposition of collective punishment are illegal. These crimes leave enduring scars, especially on children whose bodies and minds have been permanently damaged by deprivation. Nowhere is this more visible than in Gaza, where nearly half of the population are children. They are growing up amidst deprivation so severe that it stunts their physical development and fractures their sense of safety and possibility. For these children, hunger is not an episode, but a condition of life. Malnutrition, trauma, and loss have become the fabric of their childhoods. An entire generation has been marked by violence that seeks not only to destroy the present, but to extinguish the future of Gaza itself. Second, the criminalization of aid and the work of the Global Sumud Flotilla. The missions of the Global Sumud Flotilla and the Freedom Flotilla Coalition have always been humanitarian. Our vessels carry food, medicine, and human witnesses. Under international law, humanitarian aid and civilian vessels are protected. Yet, the flotilla missions have been criminalized over and over again. After the Conscience was bombed in Malta in May, we sailed with a small vessel called the Madeleine, carrying just 12 people. We carried only 8. Yet we were attacked with chemical agents, intercepted in international waters, kidnapped and imprisoned. Despite these challenges, we returned, as promised, with 42 vessels and 462 people from across the globe. Organizing such a mission in only 2 months is a testament to the power of collective action. What was first a single boat mobilized the world. Doctors, engineers, human rights defenders, students, lawyers, and journalists united under the banner of global solidarity and resistance. The global Sumut flotilla was again attacked at sea. Drone strikes targeted dozens of boats, first in Tunisian waters, then in international waters near Greece. This was not only a breach of the law of the sea, but a demonstration of impunity. The occupying power pursued a civilian humanitarian initiative across borders, attacking in national and international waters without restraint. Many of us were taken to Kitsiot in the Negev desert, a prison notorious for torture and inhumane treatment. We endured conditions designed to break human dignity: beatings, sleep deprivation, psychological violence, sexual assault, dogs in the corridors and cells, tight handcuffs, blindfolds, and snipers' lasers fixed on our foreheads. Blatant violations of international human rights law. The walls bore blood, bullet holes, and the names of Palestinian hostages, especially from Gaza, who had possibly endured months, years, decades of imprisonment and torture. What we lived for a week was just a fraction of what Palestinian hostages endure for years. It must be clear, the attacks and interception did not stop us. It only strengthened our resolve. The global Sumut flotilla mobilized millions worldwide through demonstrations, student occupations, dock workers' strikes, and global pressure. Military vessels from Italy, Spain, and Turkey were mobilized. To say, not out of goodwill, but because states feared the anger of their citizens. This was the work of the people, not of governments that remain complicit by maintaining ties to the Zionist entity. Our actions may have accelerated ceasefire negotiations, but our missions are not over. The siege continues. The genocide continues. Aid remains criminalized. Third, law, colonialism, and the duty of conscience. International humanitarian law, the Fourth Geneva Convention, the Rome Statute, and customary law exist to protect human life. Collective punishment, deliberate deprivation of essentials, and attacks on humanitarian actors are explicitly prohibited. Yet these laws are ignored when political and economic interests outweigh human life. This failure is not accidental. It is deeply rooted in colonialism, apartheid, and global capitalism. The Zionist entity's siege, illegal blockade, and attacks are not isolated acts. They are part of a broader settler colonial project of dispossession and domination, serving to maintain Western and white supremacy in the Middle East. These crimes are enforced and enabled by the United States, which provides military, political, and economic support. But the United States is not alone. European states, particularly Germany, where I'm from, bear a profound historical and moral responsibility. Germany, invoking its own past crimes, has chosen not to prevent genocide, but to justify and materially and morally support another. Through arms sales, diplomatic protection, and the repression of solidarity movements, Germany has become a central pillar sustaining Israeli apartheid and genocide. Its historical guilt has been weaponized to shield a colonial regime and silence those who stand with the oppressed. This is not a conflict between equals. It is imperial domination rooted in colonial logic and white supremacy. And all of this is sustained by Western powers that continue to view Palestinians, Muslims, and Arab life as expandable. Sailing vessels unarmed into international waters under siege is dangerous, but we are aware of the risks our missions hold, and we continue because our lives are not more valuable than the lives of Palestinians. Sumut, steadfastness, is our guiding principle. The refusal to normalize injustice, starvation, and genocide. We ask this jury to recognize in legal and moral terms what has occurred and what persists, that the deliberate use of starvation, the blockade, the criminalization of aid, and systemic attacks on civilians constitutes crimes under international law, that those who enable or conceal these crimes, including the occupying power and its imperial backers, must be held accountable, and that inaction is complicity. This is not merely a legal argument. Laws exist to protect life, not to shield impunity. The people of Palestine are not statistics. They are human beings whose protection is our collective responsibility. And this is why tribunals like this one matter. When governments fail, when international courts remain silent, it is civil society, survivors, witnesses, and people of conscience who must act. Tribunals or flotillas are not symbolic. They are an assertion of people's justice, of the right and duty to document, to speak, and to resist. They are the living expression of global solidarity against colonial violence. And finally, we stand with the Palestinian people. We stand against colonialism, apartheid, and imperial domination. We stand for global solidarity and for humanitarian principles that cannot be negotiated or compromised. And we will continue to resist. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasemin. And now we will be talking about the Hind Rajab Foundation. It's a story that went globally and touched every single human heart out there. So the story about Hind Rajab Foundation will be told by Jake Rom.
To the conveners and to the jury, thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Jake Rom, and I'm here in my capacity as a representative for the Hind Rajab Foundation. Although we are a young organization, I imagine that many in the room will already be familiar with our work. But for those who are not, allow me to make a brief introduction. The Hind Rajab Foundation was established in 2024 by several volunteer lawyers and activists determined to use both national and international justice systems to hold Israeli soldiers to account for their war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide in Gaza. Our incredible research team is capable of tracking the Israeli military as it commits crimes across the Strip. We know where and when these crimes are occurring, and we know who is committing them. Based on this research, we compile extensive dossiers of evidence and build prima facie legal cases, which we then present to prosecutors in the relevant national jurisdictions under the theory of universal jurisdiction for traveling soldiers, or under the principle of nationality for dual nationals, as well as to the International Criminal Court when appropriate. Crucially, our work focuses on the rank and file Israeli soldiers, from the commanders down to the lowest ranking infantry. The choice to focus on the rank and file, to cast as wide a net as possible, is not motivated by a desire for easy wins, as if such a thing were possible in the present environment. The culture of impunity that undergirds the daily atrocities committed in Gaza permeates all levels of the Israeli military. Even if high-ranking officials face scrutiny or arrest warrants, and even this has been woefully lacking, individual soldiers feel themselves beyond the reach of the law. This is readily apparent from the brazenness and glee with which Israeli soldiers document and publish their crimes on social media. In order to begin breaking this culture, states must impose consequences, not in a piecemeal fashion, not on a few of the worst individuals, but on all of them, everywhere. Only a concerted global effort will puncture this wall of impunity. This is why international mechanisms, though welcome and though an important aspect of our work, are not and ought not be the primary actors in bringing Israeli genocidaires to justice. International mechanisms, as we have seen, move slowly and suffer from a lack of resources and from a vulnerability to political meddling. They are therefore ill-equipped to handle the vast number of perpetrators who must be brought to trial. Instead, action must be territorialized. States must make themselves into sites of accountability. Our work therefore focuses primarily on national courts, where we have already enjoyed some success. Investigations into individual soldiers have been launched in Peru, Romania, and elsewhere. In July, for example, Belgian authorities arrested and interrogated 2 visiting IDF soldiers in response to one of our filings. And although the Belgian authorities ultimately released the soldiers and referred the case to the ICC, the arrests and the firm invocation of universal jurisdiction were steps in the right direction. There has yet to be a conviction, but this is an iterative process. Each request for prosecution is more than just a legal document. It is also a way to create a record and a narrative. In each filing, we charge individuals with both war crimes and genocide because it accurately captures the scope of their crimes, but also because it is a way of situating each violation within its proper context. The destruction of civilian property not justified by military necessity, particularly dwellings, for instance, is a war crime, but it is also one of the primary modes by which Israel is rendering the Gaza Strip uninhabitable. It therefore must also be understood as the constituent act of genocide, of deliberately inflicting on the Palestinians conditions of life calculated to bring about their physical destruction. That is, the charge of war crimes alone, though heinous and serious, fails to capture the severity and totality of what has occurred and continues to occur in Gaza. The law is reactive and cognizes only discrete harms, but the crime of genocide, unlike war crimes, is necessarily systemic in nature. It is a crime which implicates the whole of the perpetrating society. Further, the recognition of what has taken place in Gaza as a genocide places affirmative legal obligations on states, in addition to those already imposed by the Geneva Conventions and other treaties. As our work has proceeded, states, initially reluctant to collaborate, have become more willing to pursue accountability. Recently, for instance, we have begun working closely with Europol to assist with war crimes investigations across the European Union. Every day, the world becomes smaller for Israeli perpetrators. There are a number of factors contributing to this development, but one is the simple work of naming which a legal filing accomplishes. Each charge pins the perpetrator to their deed in the historical record, and because the individual acts as a cog within the Israeli military, the state is pinned to the deed as well. As more and more filings are submitted, evidence against individuals creates, in a pointillist fashion, a composite picture of the totality of Israeli criminality in Gaza, a picture which becomes overwhelming in its horror. The political case against Zionism, then, is bolstered by the legal cases against its enforcers, and vice versa, thus increasing the prospects of success with each filing. The law is clear, and the tools necessary for state action have long been available. The problem is only one of political will. Like working a muscle, states become more comfortable and familiar with the long dormant tools at their disposal, the more they're compelled to use them. And the more states so compelled, the more they are collectively able to protect one another from political backlash and to articulate and enforce a vision of international law which truly applies to the weak and the powerful alike. Political will stems from popular mobilization, from the Palestinians, from organizations like ours and many others, from tribunals like this, from people of conscience like those gathered here and around the world, who do what states will not, who demonstrate that accountability is not only possible, it is necessary, and it is non-negotiable. The recent so-called ceasefire, which Israel has been violating since it began, makes this pressure even more urgent. There is a risk that states will use this slight downturn in the killing to return to the status quo, thus paving the way for the resumption of the genocide in its accelerated phase. It is incumbent on all of us, however, to keep up the pressure such that there will be no return. Because for the people of Palestine, the status quo means only more dispossession, displacement, and death. Jean-Paul Sartre stated at the 1967 Russell Tribunal for the Vietnam War, from which this tribunal draws inspiration, quote, "This crime of genocide is perpetrated under our eyes every day, making accomplices out of those who do not denounce it." His words ring just as strongly today, but he did not go far enough. Denunciation without action is still complicity at worst, or an unacceptable derogation of duty at best. Let us recall the International Court of Justice's decision in the 2007 case regarding the genocide in Srebrenica. There, the court held that states are obligated to employ all means reasonably available to them to prevent genocide, and that this obligation arises at the instant that the state learns of, or should normally have learned of, the existence of a serious risk that genocide will be committed. We are well beyond a serious risk. The genocide is happening as we speak. This obligation to act became operative at least as far back as October 2023 and becomes more urgent with each passing day. Action, by which I mean the arrest, prosecution, and punishment of all those who have perpetrated or are complicit in this genocide, and nothing less is our demand. It is my sincere hope that one day soon, these trials will take place in the courtrooms of a free Palestine, before Palestinian judges, before a Palestinian jury. That will be true justice. But until then, it is the legal obligation of every state in the world to prosecute the Israeli genocidaires wherever they may be found. To that end, esteemed members of the jury, we urge you in your report to stress the legal and moral duty of all states to undertake these prosecutions in their national courts in order to achieve a modicum of justice for the victims and the survivors, and to begin breaking Israel's wall of impunity. Thank you.
And the next speaker is joining us online. The subject he will be speaking about is the boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and also movement. So please welcome Mr. Jamal Juma. Are you with us, Mr. Jamal?
Yes, I'm with you.
Good. The time is yours. Hello.
Thank you very much. My name is Jamal Juma. I am from Jerusalem. I'm the coordinator of the Palestinian Grassroots Anti-Apartheid Wall and Settlements Movement. Also a member of the PNC, Palestinian National Committee of BDS. You know, I'm supposed to be standing there physically with you today, but the bloody military occupation forces and the fascist settler militias make the olive season this year is very bloody, and it's difficult to live really in such a situation. And I'm afraid maybe soon we will have another West Bank tribunal as well. Anyway, this year marks the 20th anniversary of the BDS, Boycott, Divestment and Sanction movement, a movement that was born out of the horrific killing of the Palestinians during the Second Intifada, the assassination of the activists and political leaders, Jenin refugee camp massacre in 2002, and the acceleration of Israeli settler colonial project constructing the apartheid wall, from the construction of the 800 kilometers apartheid wall to fragmentation of Palestinian communities into isolated ghettos, hundreds of military checkpoints, more than 500 colonies and outposts, and 1,400 kilometers of apartheid roads. The need for a coordinated, principled, and global response became undeniable. Over 2 decades, BDS has grown into a vibrant global Palestinian-led anti-apartheid movement, uniting activists, academics, trade unions, churches, legal organizations, and grassroots groups across more than 120 countries around the world. It stands today as one of the broadest social justice coalition of the 21st century, rooted in the principles of equality, freedom, and justice. With the moral authority of the popular Palestinian consensus, BDS has influenced state decisions to impose targeted sanctions on Israel. It has played an indispensable role in pressuring some of the world's largest investment funds to divest from companies and banks that enable Israeli atrocity crimes. It has galvanized the collective power of unions, associations, and other grassroots formations, representing tens of millions of workers, farmers, students, artists, academics, and justice organizers, to make local governments as well as colonial Western academic and cultural institutions divest or break ties with apartheid and its complicit institutions. Even Israeli economic experts now acknowledge this shift, affirming the role of BDS movement has played in the Israeli economy's spiral collapse, as 130 leading Israeli economists describe it in September. Also, the chairman of the Israeli Export Institute recently stated that BDS and boycotts have changed Israel's global trade landscape. He added, economical boycott and BDS organizations presents major challenges, and in some countries we are forced to operate under a radar. According to S&P, Israeli projected GDP growth for 2024 stands for 0%, while approximately 60,000 businesses have closed amid growing global isolation. Amid the intensified genocidal assault on Gaza and global attention on Gaza, the BDS movement has succeeded in shifting the discourse around Israel from traditional diplomacy and complicity to one of accountability, divestment and sanctions, reframing Israeli regime as one of the settler colonialism, apartheid, and military occupation. This shift is not merely rhetorical. It is reflected in the decisions of universities, cultural institutions, and unions that have paused or ended relation with complicit entities. Millions stood up to say that complicity is not an option. In the face of horror, the movement transformed outrage into organized power, solidarity into tangible pressure, and despair into determination, providing that the global consensus, when mobilized, can still shake the foundation of oppression and the settler colonial apartheid regime and anyone dare to be complicit with it. At the governmental level, the influence of BDS increasingly visible. Over the past 2 years, several governments, particularly in the global south, have taken bold steps, freezing cooperation agreements, reviewing arms trade, and reassessing diplomatic relations with Israel. City councils and parliaments across Europe, Africa, and Latin America have debated motions declaring themselves apartheid-free zones and adopting ethical procurement policies reflecting a growing global alignment with the principles of human rights and international law. While a ceasefire may momentarily pause the genocide in Gaza, it can't alter the deeper structure of occupation, apartheid, and genocidal intent without meaningful accountability, legal, economic, and political. The conditions for repeated war crimes and genocide will remain intact. Pauses bombing cannot substitute for systematic justice, and that so-called peace built on impunity will continuously collapse under a regime of genocide. For 2 decades, the BDS movement has embodied strategic nonviolence resistance and collective moral courage. Today, our task remains urgent: to intensify pressure on states, corporations, and institutions that enables Israel's crimes, to uphold international law in practice, not just principles, and to ensure that our collective struggle leads to freedom, justice, and the right of return for our Palestinian people. I will end with the Palestinian civil society react to the Trump-Netanyahu genocide right after the ceasefire, which we and BDS mobilized the Palestinian society to. It says, in response to the illegal colonial Israeli-US Trump plan, Palestinian civil society insists on full Palestinian rights and calls for escalating BDS pressure to end all state, corporate, and institutional complicity with Israel's regime of settler colonialism, military occupation, apartheid, and genocide. Even if ceasefire is reached, the genocide, the famine, the repercussions of the annihilation of Gaza will not end. Solidarity is more needed than ever now. But it begins with ending complicity, which is a moral and legal obligation. The Palestinian consensus asks of the global solidarity movements, particular trade unions, masses, movements, as well as people of conscience to respect and advocate for the comprehensive right of Palestinian people, at least the very least 3 rights listed in the historic BDS call in 2005, and isolate Israeli regime of oppression by ending all state, corporate, and institutional complicity with it. Together we can and must disrupt all complicity in Israeli final solution for the indigenous Palestinian people. Together we can dismantle Israeli apartheid just as South African apartheid was dismantled And anything less than that would be a failure for our humanity. Thank you very much.
Mr. Juma, I would like to ask you just to stay with us because we are now starting a part of the session with the questions and answers. So if someone from the jury has a question for you, we would be happy to hear the answer. So,
Sure.
Thank you very much. Dear members of the jury, if you have any questions, we are open to that at the moment.
Thank you very much for all the presenters. My first question is for Ramzi and Wadia. What recommendations you would give the issues you addressed, particularly resistance, armed resistance, self-defense, not only with respect to Gaza and the West Bank, but also with respect to Lebanon and Syria, where you have an Israeli aggression all over the place. And then I have a question for Jack on the US legal system. You mentioned a few examples in Europe and Latin America. Are there any particular impediments when it comes to the US legal system that you can't overcome, or we only have naming and shaming? In other words, is there a statute or jurisdictional problems with that to prosecute or to bring in other charges? Since usually federal courts defer to the executive branch, but are there certain laws that we can use? And do you have a list of these countries, which countries are easier than others that we can have as recommendations? On the other question, which has to do with the overall strategic goal of resistance. In 1937, Ben Gurion gave a speech in New York when he was asked what would constitute a win for the Zionist movement. He had an interesting answer in which he says, when we change the paradigm from being a Jewish problem into an Arab problem. So today we talk about the Palestinian problem. In his mind, that would have been the win. And I think we need a shifting paradigm, and that's the essence of my question. Should we talk about the Israeli problem rather than a Palestinian problem? And with that, then the strategic goal would be the dismantlement of the Zionist structures, because there is an Israeli problem. Do you agree with that statement? And do you see the question of liberation versus dismantlement or dismantling Zionist structures as one of the same, or are they different? Thank you. That goes for all panelists, whoever would like to answer that.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Wadia, yes, you can approach. And I'm calling for Mr. Ramzi if he's around to come to us, because we have a question for him.
Thank you for the question. I think to the extent that your question calls for, Dr. Sami, your question calls for, strategic analysis or something about how resistance movements operate, I don't think I'm in a position to answer. But I do think that what we've seen, especially with the Israeli and American, unfortunately they always seem to go together, reaction to the ICC warrants in particular, the level of kind of out of control response of, sanctioning the judges on the court, sanctioning the prosecutor, it shows that that has struck a nerve, right? So there is value, in a kind of a global picture, there is value on returning to international law, even with all its drawbacks and limitations and Eurocentric focus. There is, I think, value in insisting on those aspects of international law that recognize Palestinian rights, including a right to resistance, right, to pressing them. And I think, you know, obviously Lebanon has its own problems, Syria has its own problems, but if they were in a position to also make arguments along those lines, I don't think it is without merit or without value to basically structuring, I hate to use the word marketing, but to basically using it as a way to resist what you call the Israeli problem, right? I think it's important that even though we recognize all the drawbacks of international law, we still take what it can give us as a way to showing that the Israelis are the ones who are engaged in illegitimate action. So that's what I would say to that. Thank you.
Mr. Ramsey, I would like to ask you kindly to approach because we do have a question for you. Can you please just repeat the first question so Mr. Ramsey could hear it since he was not in the hall at the time?
Very well. I mean, in light of what you represented as resistance, armed resistance, self-defense, and so on and so forth, and that extends not just to West Bank and Gaza, but also to Syria and Lebanon, what would be your recommendations for these items? Not only for those who are the victims, but also for worldwide. What do you mean by, since resistance is not just one form, but all kinds of forms. So if you have any comments about practical things.
Absolutely. So the question is the recommendation to the jury or to the...
No, for us, because we have to give recommendations.
Right, absolutely. So I think one of the issues is that we approach the question of armed resistance, or we approach the question of resistance in this kind of ideological or political and culturally sensitive manner. Therefore, we kind of impose our own division of what resistance is on the Palestinians. And as a result, the Palestinians kind of have to respond to our own perception of what resistance is. The first recommendation is to try to understand al-muqawama, or resistance, from a Palestinian point of view. If you understand it from a Palestinian point of view, and where the Palestinian voice is going to be centered in offering an understanding of why Palestinians resist and under what circumstances and how and why, then this element of judgment that we usually cast on the Palestinians is going to disappear. Now we understand why they do it. Now, what method of resistance? Notice it's the Palestinian people themselves that determine that. 1987, for example, during the first Intifada, we threw rocks and we held protests and we carried out general strikes. That was a popular form of resistance. But then by the end of the Intifada, when the Palestinian voice was not enough to make the desired change internationally, you began seeing kind of the formation of various small cells of young people in Gaza, in the West Bank, and that was kind of the beginning of the return to armed resistance. So this is why this understanding is particularly important. The final thing is that the judgment on the Palestinians regarding the issue of resistance kind of changes the power dynamics. When you tell Palestinians, resist this way, fight this way, I can only legitimize you, accept you, embrace you even, or platform you, if you adhere to these sets of ideas and positions, then in doing so, you place yourself, not yourself, Dr. Sami, but that person himself, places himself in a power position that he is in a higher moral standards. And we have to be in a position of defending and explaining. I honestly think, and maybe this is going to get me in some kind of trouble, let's imagine a scenario in which the Palestinians did not resist. And I'm talking about all forms of resistance in Gaza. Those 2,000 Merkava and other military vehicles were not destroyed. Nobody talks about that, by the way, for some reason. That's more than any other Arab army since the beginning of this so-called conflict. That was done by the young people of Gaza. And these young people are part of the larger mass that is Gaza. They're not aliens, they are not foreigners, they are not invaders, they are not militants coming across borders, they are Gazans. Imagine if they did not resist. And if they did not send a message to Israel that no longer will firepower determine political outcomes. Imagine what would be in Gaza right now. Settlements will be everywhere. The beaches of Gaza will be now casinos, and Israeli soldiers will be wining and dining on the beaches of my refugee camp in Gaza. This happened, yes, because of the steadfastness of the people, yes, because of the sumud of the people, but also because of the resistance of the people in all of its manifestations, including armed resistance. So my recommendation is step back, try to understand resistance from a Palestinian point of view. Do not cast a judgment. Try to understand so that you develop a deeper and better relationship with how Palestinians choose to resist and why. Thank you.
I do call Jake now, Mr. Jake Ram, to answer his question.
You're right to notice that the United States is a unique and difficult jurisdiction for our work, but it's not for lack of the legal tools. The United States does have universal jurisdiction codified into its laws. It has codified the Genocide Convention. There's a Clinton-era law passed in 1996 called the War Crimes Act. And what the War Crimes Act does is it establishes extraterritorial jurisdiction over war crimes, over grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions. And this is true of acts committed by US nationals abroad, but it's also true of grave breaches committed by anyone in the world, as long as they are physically present on US soil, which is basically the same as anywhere else. The difference, however, is that everything that, every charge under the War Crimes Act needs to be certified by the Attorney General. And it also requires some input from the Secretary of State. And there's certain factors that they have to weigh. And so, this always presents a problem because of the United States' position vis-a-vis Israel and, the concept of international law and war crimes in general. But particularly now, it's difficult. We are working on things in the United States. I'm not going to say what they are, but there's things happening. But we're not naive. We understand that Pam Bondi is likely not going to certify a war crimes charge against an Israeli soldier, especially as the United States continues to commit war crimes and crimes against humanity, both in complicity with Israel and also more recently against people in the Caribbean, right? But so there are still things that can be done that are different than name and shame in like a traditional human rights sense, which is to say we don't just publish the names of every soldier we have, right? We have a long list of people that we've been tracking, of people who have committed crimes, people who we're building files on, but we're not interested in doxing people. We're not interested in publishing names so that people can just know the names of the perpetrator. We're interested in doing legal filings. We're interested in charging these people with crimes with the idea that they will be held accountable. And of course, that is up to the prosecutors in each individual jurisdiction, because we're not a state. We can't arrest anyone. We can't even charge them. But what we can do is try to use the process of the law, the mechanisms of the law, and the law as it is written to highlight, one, the manifest criminality of Israel and the Israeli soldiers, two, make make these issues like cognizable in a much more like bite-sized is perhaps the wrong word, but bite-sized fashion for the public, which is often it's often difficult to think in structural terms, to think of, what can we do against a structure like Nakba, a structure like settler colonialism, against an entire entity like Israel. And there's heroic work being done in terms of arms embargoes, people militating for the severing of economic ties. But part of what a legal filing does, a war crimes charge does, is it it puts a face to it. It makes the entire process of criminality easily understandable in the form of one person's actions. And indeed, like the entire mosaic of all of this criminality speaks to the nature of the state. And what it also does is it contains within it a kind of revolutionary demand that hides behind a discrete one, which is to say that if any country And they will. I am so confident that they will. But if and when a country charges, arrests, prosecutes, and punishes an Israeli soldier for war crimes, that will signal the emergence of a new kind of international order, right? What we are asking states to do is, for the first time ever, really, apply international law to a powerful state while it is still in power. And if they are capable of doing that, and if and when they do that, that will introduce, really for the first time, rule of law on the international level, and it will start signaling to powerful states, not just Israel, but also the United States and others, that they can no longer get away with this because law is becoming operative and no one is above it anymore.
And for Mr. Juma, if you have heard clearly questions, I believe that your question was, should we discuss the Israeli question or the Israeli problem?
Yes, I agree. I think so. I think this is what has to be shifted, like that Israel became like the problem of the world, not just the Palestinians, like the problem of the region, the problem of it seems that the problem of the United States as well. So the people all around the world is now talking about Israel as a criminal, as an apartheid, as a genocidal state. So that's why it should be their problem. It's not the Palestinian problem. Palestinians are standing in their land, they are resisting, continue resisting, and they will not give up their land. So yeah, totally agree with that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you.
Thank you to members of the jury, and thank you to all of the speakers. 15 minutes coffee break, and then we're back to continue and proceed with the third day of the Gaza Tribunal. with our planned session. We will be talking about solidarity in the next minutes.
Sorry.
So again, I'm kindly inviting you to take your seats so we could proceed. The first session and the topic we will be talking about is the Oslo Solidarity by Charlotte Quayle and Dr. Mads Gilbert. They will be speaking, elaborating, and analyzing together.
Kommer det?
Et øyeblikk.
Hun har introdusert oss.
Et øyeblikk.
Thank you.
Jeg føler vi skal vente litt. Nei? Bare føler vi skal vente litt. Skal dere folk holde på å komme inn?
Should we start or should we wait for people to... Okay.
Dear guests, Mads and I are here today on behalf of our small organization called the Oslo Solidarity. When I got to know Mads 2 years ago, I was desperate. It had become clear that a man-made Israeli catastrophe was taking place in Gaza. And like almost everyone else, I knew I had to do something, but I had no idea what. So I joined the traditional solidarity movement. I started going to demonstrations, and for a while I found some comfort there. But at a point, I was standing outside the Norwegian parliament as the politicians were about to vote over the recognition of Palestine. We were a couple of hundred activists screaming for the recognition, but they didn't listen to us then. What we were doing had no effect at the time. I'm not in any way saying that traditional solidarity activism doesn't have an impact, but I believe we have to be more inventive and we must speed things up. And I'm an artist. I make music. A big part of my job is to give messages wings, to make them fly. I have a platform and some people listen to my voice, but I felt that I lacked knowledge. So I joined forces with Mats.
And thank you. And I would ask if our friends could please stop the talking and have quiet in the room. It would be very nice. Thank you.
Or close the doors.
Or close the doors. So, while Charlotte is an artist, I am a medical doctor and a scientist. On my part, I had been doing the traditional solidarity activism since the popular protests against the Vietnam War when I was a young medical student. At some time, I felt a need to fill the void between the slogans and the harsh realities of uncaring people of colonial powers not really giving a damn about the consequences. So for me, evidence became a new weapon of the solidarity to gain more power. From my first war surgery solidarity mission to Beirut in 1981 and 82, which was a horrible eye-opener, and until now, I have been obsessed with gathering as much evidence as possible and to produce scientific studies on the effects of armed colonialism in general and the Israeli settler colonial brutality in particular, and their use of myriads of devilish weapons developed to kill and maim the oppressed people who dares resist and fight. But, my friends, knowledge alone has no wings and may be left behind in dusty rooms and libraries and in discourses between quiet scholars. I felt, as the famous Australian journalist John Pilger once said, I am not a voice for the voiceless. I'm just amplifying those who the powers with intention are making voiceless. So we started our work with a Solidarity Stunt project where we actually covered about 100 statues in the famous Oslo Vigeland Statue Park with Kefies. And sometimes you know that plans may not have so clear objectives, but give us energy to create new alliances across uncharted land. And such alliances help us discover unseen possibilities. We can't just work with or alike, me with doctor and scientists, but we need to cross borders and value the differences as new power for the solidarity.
Or as I would say in a slightly less complicated way, Mats knows something I don't, and I know some things he doesn't. Our different ways of seeing things can be a huge asset if we join forces. There is no inherent contradiction between, I'm losing my sound, okay, between art and science. On the contrary, they can be complementary.
So we had this new idea. In the thick of the darkness surrounding us all from the horrors of Gaza, could art and science be new allied in voicing and lifting the knowledge to many more people to amplify the resistance of the Palestinian people? So we, a small odd group of an artist, a medical scientist, a music producer, he's not here, and a master of political science, she's not here, we decided to establish Oslo Solidarity, a name very deliberately chosen with a goal to re-establish the name of Oslo, our city, as a real metaphor for solidarity, not a term associated with false negotiations and backstabbing the Palestinians.
We wanted to see if new expressions could mobilize new people and groups, in addition to the traditional street marches and slogans. It is a fact that the majority of the population on this planet is against the oppressing and the killing of innocent people. And the solidarity movement for Palestine has grown very strong these last 2 years. But we need the rest of the world to join. We believe that one way of increasing the mobilization speed can be to work together with people or groups who have different skills and experiences than yourself. In our case, that means mixing our knowledge and networks of art and science.
Exactly. So what did we do? We did several things. First of all, we created the Oslo Conversation, which was a new space for open dialogue on stage between leading key scholars, Palestinians, an experienced moderator, and a large public presence. This was a 90-minute conversation between Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, professor, the Jewish historian professor Ilan Pape, myself, and a Norwegian member of the Norwegian Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee. The event went from idea to reality precisely because we merged our networks. My colleagues were on stage. Charlotte's colleagues produced the whole performance. None of this could have been pulled off alone, and the hall was packed.
And we also organized New Year's Promises to Gaza, a large solidarity concert with Norway's most renowned artists on stage in January 2025. We raised $75,000 and we donated the net funds directly to Palestinian Medical Relief Society. The storyline during the concert was the Palestinian voice of Dr. Khalil in Gaza, sharing his daily life at work, when displaced, and when at home. And we established the Artists' Choir for Palestine in order to offer artists who may be both shy and individualistic a group or a scene to express their solidarity together. Since the establishment in April 2024, we've been singing every week on streets, in tramway stations, for NGOs and ministries to encourage good people to use any available peaceful tool to work for justice in Palestine.
So why is solidarity important and why do we need various expressions? Solidarity is not an act of charity. It is an act of unity between people fighting towards the same goals on different grounds, as was said by the late first president of the Free Mozambique Republic. The Palestinian struggle against colonialism, inhumanity, racism, and genocide is our struggle, because we are one humanity, and who knows who's next to be attacked and occupied by the colonizers. Solidarity is poor man's arms against oppression and apartheid. We own it, but only if we use it actively. Solidarity strengthens the just struggle in occupied Palestine and the armed resistance, as it does for any people resisting occupation. We can all be influential agents of change. We are all needed. We all have a voice and a talent, but you have to use it because time is a critical factor. We need much more variety in the expression of solidarity. Shall we mobilize the silent majority who are in favor of and really support the Palestinian struggle? Many new forms of active solidarity are needed to engage.
So what have we achieved and what lessons have we learned? Well, art is different from traditional activism, and we need other platforms. Singing instead of shouting has turned out to be just as effective. And for many people, this non-aggressive, sort of friendly form of protesting is easier to take part in. We've raised awareness and substantial amounts of money, which are transferred directly to Palestinian NGOs, not Western ones, which raises a new important discourse. We've changed from always donating to Western relief industry to now always supporting the Palestinian NGOs. And joining forces seems to be an instrumental key to make things happen. Find someone who knows something you don't, and get things done together.
So, dear friends, let us close this small talk and invite you to join us to see a final example of this combined work of science, music, and art. And we will present you a final example, the Winter Bird Project. Actually, the Winter Bird Project is a joint effort combining the poet and the translation of the poem by the Palestinian author Naiwan Darwish, who lives in Al-Quds in Jerusalem, a video from Gaza, from Rafah, made by a very professional video artist, whose name we cannot tell you because of security reasons. The composer of the music and the vocals is Charlotte, and the music producer is Måns Lundberg from Sweden. So truly an international joint effort to find a new way of expressing our solidarity, and you will now hear the song. Please sound.
How many bedrooms do I need to get a bit of sleep? To get a bit of sleep. How many chairs to sit myself down? How many roads to walk back to you? My distant country. This time I've gone, and I'm not coming back. Your job now is to slip out, lovesick and afraid. And come and search of me.
Thank you.
Thank you to Charlotte and to Dr. Metz. And now we will be watching a video called World Beyond War by David Swanson.
The governments could do even more. Here are 14 things they could do. Things that many of us have been demanding they do, individually and collectively, through Uniting for Peace in the General Assembly for many months now. Since we shifted our focus in this particular part of our anti-genocide efforts from demanding a genocide case in the International Court of Justice, achieved through the governments could do even more. Here are 14 things they could do. Things that many of us have been demanding they do, individually and collectively, through Uniting for Peace in the General Assembly for many months now. Since we shifted our focus in this particular part of our anti-genocide efforts from demanding a genocide case in the International Court of Justice, achieved through the decency of the government of South Africa. Imagine a large block of governments, or all but Israel and its most fervent accomplices, being compelled to do these things. 1. Arrest Israeli or any other officials facing arrest warrants from the International Criminal Court. Prosecute Israeli criminals under universal jurisdiction. Establish a complete embargo on weapons or weapons parts to or from Israel and to or from any nation not upholding such an arms embargo on Israel. 4. End diplomatic relations with Israel. 5. End financial transactions, trade, and travel to and from Israel. 6. Train and send unarmed civilian defense teams, food, medicine, doctors, and aid workers to Palestine. 7. Develop a major public educational campaign about the genocide in Gaza and the propaganda that has facilitated it. 8. Support a Uniting for Peace action through the UN General Assembly to implement worldwide numbers 3 through 7 above, and to do steps 9 through 12 as follows. 9. Economically sanction Israeli war criminals. 10. Expel Israel from the United Nations. 11. Recognize the nation of Palestine. 12. Move UN meetings and headquarters out of the United States. 13. Break off military relations with and expel from your nation troops belonging to any government that is not upholding an arms embargo on Israel. And 14. Halt membership or support for weapons-dealing institutions that do not uphold an arms embargo on Israel. The Abraham Accords, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, etc. Uniting for Peace is a means for the General Assembly to circumvent the veto-crippled Security Council if 2/3 of nations choose to do so. Were they to do so and pass a significant share of the 14 measures I've just listed, the genocide would end and the world would be remade in various ways. The collapse of NATO would be more than a side note. Were the world to pass all 14 measures and act on them, vastly more people would need to gain a deeper understanding of what some of them mean. In particular, the one mentioning unarmed civilian defense teams. No amount of seminars, websites, online courses, and articles, short of buying a corporate media outlet, seems capable of changing the fact that almost no one will ever know what that means. There is an introduction to the concept with an interesting list of successes that you can find at worldbeyondwar.org/list. And of course, we have spent years failing to get a Uniting for Peace action off the ground, but that project has now been made vastly more difficult by various individuals and organizations with the absolute best intentions, proposing that such a step include the use of an armed military force. Many have a bit carelessly thrown their support behind such an idea for some very weak reasons, including, 1, the proposal is sometimes worded so vaguely that one can tell oneself that it's a proposal for an unarmed protection team, as long as one doesn't read too closely or click too many links. 2, numerous ideas more likely to succeed, more likely to be approved by governments, and more likely to have desirable results when acted on, have thus far failed, and therefore it's time to try something else even if it's a bad idea. Yeah, not a good argument. 3, there's a false idea newly minted that one cannot do uniting for peace at all without doing a military intervention. Nonsense. And 4, lots of other good people are supporting this, so even if it seems a bit crazy, one must support them regardless, especially if they are Palestinians. As if we are not grown adults, capable of amicable disagreement, with a moral responsibility to point out when a train is running off a track.
So after David Swenson, we will listen to Metin Duran right now, and the topic is Anatolian Civil Society Platform.
Esteemed members of the jury, I think it's too late for them, and conscientious people from all corners of the world who follow us. I salute you with Islam words. Peace be upon you. Allah'ın selamı üzerinize olsun. Yuhayyikum bi tahiyyatil İslam. Esselamu aleyküm ve rahmetullahi ve berekatuhu. I came here to speak about the terrorist state and its members who commit genocide and massacres, acts that make us ashamed of our humanity even as we speak. We have platforms supporting the Palestinian resistance consisting of organized civil society organizations in all cities of Anatolia, and there is an Anatolian civil society platform as a superstructure that unites this platform, the Anatolian Civil Society Platform, Anadolu Sivil Toplum Kuruluşları Platformu. Throughout my speech, I will refer this platform as ASTP. In fact, civil society organizations present in every city were active before the October 7 attacks. They rarely came together and were able to communicate. However, after October 7, civil society organizations across cities have united around the common issue of Gaza. These platforms that formed in the cities later created ASTP. In other words, this is so important, in other words, Gaza became the unifier of the Ummah, and Gaza became the unifier of humanity. At times, various events were organized, sometimes with everyone in the city joined these organizations. Sometimes only children took a part, and at the other times, joiners were only healthcare workers. In fact, we must thank to Gaza. We realize that we are much more than we thought. Gaza taught this to us. As Zionist Israel continued to kill civilians, the crowd standing against it grew larger. People with different worldviews, religions, and ethnicities united in the face of the genocide. From the Far East to America, people all around the world revolted. They resisted the genocide despite Israel's shameful stance the rest of the world has made Gaza the center of its life. But first of all, before talking about the children, women, and civilians innocently killed by Zionists, we need to talk about their reasons for killing them. We must learn and we must think about their reasons to kill children and women and civils. They claim that the land of Palestine belonged to their ancestors 3,000 years ago. They are asserting a right to these lands. I want to empathize. If we accept this claim, if we say that they are telling true, then 5 million United States citizens would have to leave the entire continent to the Native Americans and return to Europe. If we accept this claim as true, then we, the Turks, have to leave Anatolian lands and return to steppe of Asia. There is no chance we can accept this offer as a correct. The lands they claim belong to them are the lands they were expelled from 3,000 years ago. And these lands belong to Palestinians and Gazans. 100 years ago, Theodore Herzl and his associates devised a plan and began systemic genocide. After 1948, this genocide, ignoring and torture, began to be carried out by a so-called state. It's important, by a so-called state, and in the last 2.5 years, it has become a lawless act with no regard for human rights. They thought that by killing Gazans, they could make them give up. They thought that by killing, they could intimidate the peoples of the world. They will never succeed in this. There are millions in Anatolia who wholeheartedly support the Gazans. Every association and foundation that is a member of ASTP will support this resistance until their last breath. Over the past 2.5 years, more than 2,000 associations and foundations have organized almost daily actions, press statements, and marches. Most recently, they launched the Smooth Flotilla from Mediterranean toward Gaza's territorial waters. They strove to break the blockade and to deliver food and medicine to Gaza. Perhaps our activists on the ships could not embrace Gazans physically, but they made consist-bearing people everywhere see Israel's operation. And now the Smooth continues its journey on the land. The Smooth is moving now on the land. How is it doing? How do they make it? Every activist, young or old, children or adults, women or men, are holding panels and conferences around the world to expose Israelis' activities. And their slogan is the same. We will organize new flotillas and new land convoys. We will continue the resistance until Gaza and Palestine are free. ASTP will continue to uphold its claim to end operation, which is the common denominator of all humanity. Each of our volunteers will continue their work with this awareness. For this reason, we fully support the meaningful work done by the Gaza tribunals. All ASTP associations stand behind this tribunal and behalf of humanity. dear juries, and the people in the saloon. There is one more problem. Dual citizens and dual passport holders who fought in the ranks of Israel are as guilty as those who govern the state of Israel. They violated international law, killed Gazan women, children, and civilization. They must be prosecuted. Two, I ask that you place this issue on your agenda. There are lots of people, they are living with us in our countries, for example in Turkey, Istanbul, and they are also going to Israel and fighting, and they will come back after the war. They are thinking that, and our people, the Turkish people, doesn't like it. They must also, it's the subject of this tribunal. We are not tired. Yes, we want to war to stop, not because we are excited or we'll give up, but because we want hope for all humanity. We know that the Zionist ideology, whose history is full of such massacres and which killed even its own prophets without mercy, will not be reformed. But at least we can make sure the guilty are punished. Free Palestine and free world is possible. Gaza Tribunal will show United Nations and European courts of human rights the way to penalize war guilty. For this reason, I thank all members of the Gaza tribunals. I hope, as the last sentence, I hope to read the final declaration of this court together on the free shores of Gaza. I extend my respect to all of you. Thanks a lot.
Worldwide Lawyers Association is something we will be listening to and listen about for the next 10 minutes. Hussein Dishli and Hassan Basri Bulbul will be speaking about this.
Distinguished colleagues and dear participants, today we are going to speak about global legal solidarity with the Palestinian people, which is itself a call for global coordination for Palestinian liberation. When we speak of Palestine today, we speak of an ongoing Israeli genocide in Gaza and 77 years of uninterrupted Nakba, 77 years of incremental genocide, apartheid, dispossession, and the systematic denial of the most basic human rights and freedoms. Throughout these decades, international law and international community that claims to uphold it, including the UN, has failed the Palestinian people. Thus, our concern is not merely what the law is, but what law ought to become in a world that cannot and must not forgive, forget, or unsee the atrocities inflicted upon Palestinian people. The central question before us is what should be the role of lobbyists, legal scholars, and legal communities in the struggle of Palestinian liberation. To speak of global legal solidarity is to reimagine the law itself, not as a static instrument of state power, but as a living terrain of resistance. International law, as many critical scholars remind us, was not broken by empire, it was built for it. Yet, it can be turned against its origins through coordinated critical praxis. Lawyers committed to Palestinian liberation must conceive of themselves globally as a single, coordinated legal organism, developing incremental victories, interlocking cases, and complementary strategies across jurisdictions to form a coherent and cumulative legal movement. Fragmentation has proven fatal. The proliferation of uncoordinated, substandard filings that end in publicity rather than progress give the appearance of activity while undermining real accountability. Solidarity must therefore be deliberate and studied, anchored in coordination, shared standards, and political clarity. We must build a global legal infrastructure capable of serving Palestinian liberation, not merely addressing or representing Palestinian suffering. So the first pillar of solidarity is accountability. But accountability must move beyond litigation as a ritual of punishment. It must become an architecture for truth, restitution, and transformation. Strategic and offensive litigation against perpetrators of genocide, war crimes, remains indispensable. Yet legal action must also target the structures that sustain those crimes, the corporate networks, financial flows, and diplomatic shields that enable Zionist impunity. As articulated in the Gaza Tribunal legal sessions, accountability must be infrastructural, designed to dismantle criminal networks globally under frameworks like joint criminal enterprise-style liability. We must then pursue comprehensive documentation of all Palestinian injuries. We must integrate reparations into every accountability framework. We must develop centralized evidence tracking systems. We must expand universal jurisdiction filings. Accountability must also seek societal catharsis, acknowledging that justice is not only about punishing crimes, but dismantling their causes. Genuine liberation demands that law pierce the surface of violence to expose its ideological roots, genocidal tendencies, racial supremacy, colonial property regimes, and imperial immunity.
Distinguished colleagues, members of the tribunal, and comrades in justice. My colleague Hassan has delivered the first part of the speech, and I continue from where he left. He mentioned the first pillar of solidarity as accountability, under which I would like to add just a statement, which is that after advisory opinion, July 2024, no lawyer solely collect only criminal testimonies or evidences. Because as granted in the advisory opinion, Palestinians has a right to reparations, and any lawyer or any member of legal profession conducting this work from now on shouldn't neglect collecting civil claims, any material loss that Palestinians were sacrificed, that they sacrificed. As the second pillar concern of legal solidarity is protection, both as legal defense and as a solidarity infrastructure. Across Gaza and the occupied territories, the Palestinian legal community itself is under annihilation. This is not rhetoric. This is a material annihilation, coordinated and deliberate. In Gaza, the legal infrastructure has been systematically erased. According to the report of the Palestinian Bar Association a few months ago, their headquarters in Gaza flattened. More than 215 lawyers killed, 220 injured, 907 law offices destroyed, courts completely suspended, over 3,400 lawyers displaced, thousands living in tents or makeshift shelters, their archives incinerated, their families grieving. Lawyers are not there only to protect their individual or corporate clients, but also there to protect and defend the rights of their nation and people. To destroy lawyers, Palestinian lawyers, is to destroy the very capacity for self-determination and liberation. Therefore, global legal solidarity must prioritize protection of Palestinian plaintiffs and legal workers who face surveillance, prosecutions, arrests, assassination for pursuing justice, or simply supporting their people, and they are being prosecuted with the accusations of terrorism. We should provide them an international legal accompaniment. Foreign lawyers appearing beside Palestinian claimants will create a literal shield, reducing risks through visibility. Another angle under this is capacity building. Capacity building of Palestinian legal community. We must channel resources, funding, and international partnerships to rebuild law faculties, courts, and legal archives in Gaza and across occupied Palestine. Support employment, training, and protection of Palestinian lawyers, judges, law students, and scholars, many of whom are unemployed, displaced, or endangered with magnificent skills. Defending the defenders globally is a must. Opposing the US sanctions that criminalize Palestinian human rights organizations and ICC officials. These sanctions constitute a legal counterinsurgency, which is an assault on the very idea of accountability. Protection, however, is not charity. It's a co-struggle. As Noura Erakat has argued yesterday, the Genocide Convention omits the cultural and political distraction and legal distraction, yet these are integral to genocide's totalizing aim. Protecting Palestinian legal institutions and community is therefore an act of anti-genocidal resistance for self-determination. The third pillar is legal diplomacy. The use of law as a diplomatic weapon and diplomacy as a vehicle for law. Our collective efforts must merge legal expertise with political coordination. This includes diplomatic briefings and informal bloc coordinations, tailoring legal memorandums to friendly states to Palestine, advising them on litigation, sanctions, and multilateral defense strategies. Mobilizing diplomatic blocs to enforce arms and trade embargoes against Israel, invoking obligations under ICJ rulings. Dignifies self-reliance and mass organizing is a must. Therefore, it's essential that interstate initiatives such as Hague Group and international civil initiatives should be supported by legal profession. By providing legal frameworks and models to turn these alliances into an economic alliance which is autonomous and self-reliant and immune from colonial sanctions. Without building these economic protection mechanisms, states and civil societies' capacity to take concrete actions will deem to be limited. Advocating for the reinstatement of Resolution 3379. Equating Zionism with racism, as you know, which was revoked later on. This is a cornerstone for redefining global anti-racism norms, working towards legislations across multiple jurisdictions based on this definition and identifying support for Zionism as a hate crime. Legal diplomacy is not symbolic lobbying. It's a counter-hegemonic coordination, transforming international law from a theater of impunity into a field of resistance. To conclude, friends, the task before us is immense and clarity is power. The destruction of Gaza's legal community, criminalization of international advocacy, and the global campaign to erase Palestinian agency all testify one truth. Justice itself is under siege. When lawyers are killed for defending victims, when judges are sanctioned for issuing warrants, when law is punished for seeking justice, then the very promise of law stands in ruins. But ruins are also foundations. From them, we can build a legal order grounded in solidarity, in decolonial politics and ethics, and in the inviolable dignity of every people living within. Global legal solidarity with Palestine is not an act of charity, it's a defense of law and justice itself, of its possibility, its purpose, and its future. Our duty is clear: to hold the criminals to account, to protect the defenders, to coordinate across borders, to train, mobilize, and unite. And to do all this not as fragments, but as a coordinated movement, as if a global legal organism acting for liberation of Palestine and Global South. From when Palestine, for when Palestine is liberated, law, especially international law, will finally begin to mean justice. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, Gaza Tribunal had a really hard job in the past 365 days, documenting, searching, reading, tracking everything that has been going on in Gaza since October 2023. Gathering evidence and documents and data, information, numbers, all of those that will be used in legal form one day once the process begins. It was a hard task for them, and it was a hard task for those who were working on a project, Witness I, that is part of the Gaza Tribunal. These people really had a hard homework to do. And we have been listening to some of those reports in the past 3 days. Tomorrow we will be having a final conclusion. But 3 days are not enough to us to tell what everything we have found out so far, everything we have seen, and every document, evidence, and proof that we have gathered. But it's enough to be loud enough to know that this is our obligation. And now it is time for all of those experts, professors, scholars, to bring you the final reports. So when they do, one by one, those reports will be given to the members of the Gaza Tribunal sitting in the front row. So for now, as of the first one of them, is Mr. Selman Aksunger on the behalf of Witness I. He will bring the first report.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think everyone here has a pretty much idea of what Witness I is. You have been seeing these videos, clips throughout the program. Witness I is a platform, is a media platform designed and created, established by media professionals in order to make a digital archive of the testimonies, statements of the people who are really at the moment lively, living under the shadow of a genocide, and also trying to amplify the voices of the people who are showing solidarity and sharing the Palestinian cause. Over the past 2 years, Witness I has collected testimonies and evidences, digital video evidences from over 100 people. And at the moment, it's a privilege and honor for me to hand over these evidence that are showing the genocide, especially from the people who are living in Gaza. And it's a very much of an honor for all of us to be able to contribute in this project as a Witness I. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Aksunger. And now it's time for Mr. Resul Uzar, on behalf of Human Rights Association, to approach and to give us his report.
Thank you very much for welcoming us. In fact, you have done a great effort just to support the civil society. That's why, in your age, I am giving my greetings to Mr. Richard Falk, that nobody can spend the time in this age for the oppressed people's rights. Thank you, heartily thank you. We are Muslim there. Solidarity Association for the Oppressed People and Human Rights. In fact, we are following Gaza Tribunal from the first day, and there is a really very great effort. And today we are just representing our reports to Gaza Tribunal, that we know that it's just a drop in the ocean. Everything was happening in front of our eyes. It doesn't need any legal even support. We have watched everything in the televisions, but you are just registering for the history. So we are the eyewitnesses. That's why I am representing my reports to Mr. Richard and the esteemed jury. Thank you very much.
And now I'm calling for Mr. Ashraf Nasrallah to also give us his report. He is the president of International Jurist Union. He will be speaking in Arabic, so all of you who have headsets, you can switch to English or your language, Turkish, to understand what he is saying.
السيد الرئيس السادة أعضاء
Esteemed President, esteemed members of the jury, here I'm honored to be standing here. I'm Ashraf Nasrallah. I have been in Gaza and I'm a judge in a high court there. I've come to the Turkey after the genocide in the Gaza, 60 days after it. I survived. I cheated that. I got away with my family. I've seen hundreds of females, males killed by Israel. I've seen the bodies. And it was a tremendous experience for me, devastating. And they did not let any international organizations to be in the Gaza. And we to the International Justice Court, we applied them to prepare this report. We worked for 2 whole years, night to day, and we are working to reflect what's happening in Gaza. with these reports that we are going to present to you includes a lot of details. They show what the invaders have done. Also, it has approximately 250 murders toward journalists, and we are providing this to you with their details. And it also has the crimes against civilians, especially their attacks on the civilians. And in Gaza, children, women were blocked from accessing food, and even the animals could not avoid the attacks of the occupants, invaders. We also have another report, and this is that by the invaders, over 100 scientists and academicians were killed by the invaders. And Turkish
and attacks have been reported. Similarly, the Shifa hospital was also reported. The prayer houses were reported by being attacked. In our report filed, the dear members of jury and to everyone listening, I wish to express that this genocide's responsibles should be tried. No one is above the law. Palestine's people seek your help. Thank you. In name of him and to all, but to members of jury and to everyone, I wish to say welcome to our country. International Union of Worldwide Lawyers Association, in terms of justice and fairness, we are founded by 42 countries members, and at this stage the tribunal session will be the lead, because for Arabs, for Palestinians, it's not about just Palestinians or Arabs or Turks, it's for humanity. Those that speak law or justice commit genocide, war crimes, invade. And to all that are in law illegal, they do this against the humanity's responsibilities, and I wish the best to all of us.
And with this final report, we do close today's session. And we kindly invite you to join us in the morning at 10 o'clock, where we start the final day of the final session of the Gaza Tribunal. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much for your time.